crossover magic. What year did soul music make the biggest splash on the pop charts? In the 1980s. If you haven't already, watch the intro video where I'll talk about the premise of the series, and make sure to check out episode 1, the 1990s. But for those who are ready to move forward in this series, let's dive back into the 1980s. First, I'll rank each year of the 80s, and then I'll do more of a deep dive into the songs from the decade's electrifying top year. So, when putting together this year-by-year ranking, I only counted 2 types of songs: number 1 hits on the mainstream hip-hop and R&B singles chart, and top 10 hip-hop and R&B singles that reached number 1 on the pop charts. Here's a ranking of each year for the 1980s. The primary factor determining the rankings is the average peak position on the Billboard Hot 100, reached by the top R&B singles during each year of the decade. Number 10, 1989. 1989 produced such number 1 R&B hits like "Dreamin'" by Vanessa Williams, "Shower Me With Your Love" by Surface, "Keep On Moving" by Soul II Soul, and "Just Because" by Anita Baker. There were 37 number 1 R&B hits in 1989, plus 2 top 10 R&B records that went to number 1 on the pop charts, so a total of the 39 highest charting soul hits of '89. The average peak position of these R&B hits on the pop charts, 52. Number 9, 1988. 1988 produced number 1 R&B hits such as "The Butt," the Go-Go Classic by EU, "Don't Be Cruel" by Bobby Brown, "Mercedes Boy" by Pebbles, and "Fishnet" by Morris Day. There were 34 number 1 R&B hits in 1988, plus 5 top 10 soul records that went to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100, for a total of the 39 highest charting soul hits of '88. The average peak position of these R&B hits on the pop charts, 33. Number 8, 1981. 1981 produced number 1 R&B hits like "Give It To Me Baby" by Rick James, "Let's Groove" by Earth, Wind & Fire, "I'm In Love" by Evelyn Champagne King, and "Burn Rubber" by the Gap Band. There were 16 number 1 R&B hits in 1981. The average peak position of these highest charting soul hits on the pop charts, 30. Number 7, 1986. 1986 produced number 1 R&B hits such as "Pop Pop Pop Goes My Mind" by LeVert, "Your Smile" by Renee and Angela, "Nasty" by Janet Jackson, and "Do Me Baby" by Melissa Morgan. There were 28 number 1 R&B hits in 1986, plus 3 top 5 soul records that went to number 1 on the pop charts, for a total of the 28 highest charting soul hits of '86. The average peak position of these R&B hits on the pop charts, 29. Number 6, 1987. 1987 produced a number 1 soulful dance hit, "Head and Toe" by Lisa Lisa and Cult Jam, what I believe is the first number 1 rap hit on the R&B charts, "I Need Love" by LL Cool J, "I Feel Good All Over" by Stephanie Mills, and "Don't Disturb This Groove" by The System. There were 32 number 1 R&B hits in 1987, plus 4 top 5 soul records that went to number 1 on the pop charts, for a total of the 37 highest charting soul hits of '87. The average peak position of these R&B hits on the pop charts, 28. So here's the top 5. Number 5, 1983. 1983 produced number 1 R&B hits like "Candy Girl" by New Edition, "Ain't Nobody" by Rufus and Shaka Khan, "Billie Jean" by Michael Jackson, and "Juicy Fruit" by Matume. There were 14 number 1 R&B hits in 1983, plus 1 top 10 and 2 top 5 soul records that went to number 1 on the pop charts, for a total of the 17 highest charting soul hits of '83. The average peak position of these R&B hits on the pop charts, 27. Number 4, 1982. 1982 produced number 1 R&B hits like "Call Me" by Sky, Sexual Healing by Marvin Gaye, Let It Whip by the Daz Band, and the stirring performance of Jennifer Holliday's Dream Girls classic, And I'm Telling You, I'm Not Going. There were 13 number one R&B hits in 1982, plus one top 5 soul record that went to number 1 on the pop charts, for a total of the 14 highest charting soul hits of 82. The average peak position of these R&B hits on the pop charts, 25. Number 3, 1985. 1985 produced number 1 R&B hits such as Rock Me Tonight for Old Time's Sake by Freddie Jackson, Part-Time Lover by Stevie Wonder, Saving All My Love for You by Whitney Houston, and Freeway of Love by the Queen of Soul, Aretha Franklin. There were 20 number 1 R&B hits in 1985, plus 2 top 10 soul records that went to number 1 on the pop charts, for a total of the 22 highest charting soul hits of 85. The average peak position of these R&B hits on the pop charts, 24. Number 2, 1984. 1984 produced number 1 R&B hits like She's Strange by Cameo, maybe my favorite Prince record, When Doves Cry, If Only You Knew by Patti LaBelle, and Caribbean Queen by Billy Ocean. There were 18 number 1 R&B hits in 1984, plus 2 more top 10 crossover records that went to number 1 on the pop charts, for a total of the 20 highest charting soul hits of 84. The average peak position of these R&B hits on the pop charts, 18. And now, the greatest crossover year for soul music in the 1980s was 1980. 1980 produced number 1 R&B hits such as Upside Down by Diana Ross, Let's Get Serious by Jermaine Jackson, Give Me the Night by George Benson, and one of my favorite 80s funk jams, Stomp by the Brothers Johnson. There were 14 number 1 R&B hits in 1980. The average peak position on the pop charts of these highest charting soul records, 16. Now, let's do a deep dive back to 1980. Before we get into the top 14 ranking of every number 1 R&B hit in 1980, here are some notable honorable mentions. Soul records that moved into the top 10 in 1980 on both the R&B and pop charts, but did not reach number 1 on either chart. On the Radio by Donna Summer, Working My Way Back to You by the Spinners, Send One Your Love by Stevie Wonder, Too Hot by Kool and the Gang, Cupid, I've Loved You for a Long Time, the medley by the Spinners, Off the Wall by Michael Jackson, He's So Shy by the Pointer Sisters, Shining Star by the Manhattans, I'm Coming Out by Diana Ross. Never Knew Love Like This Before by Stephanie Mills. And I decided to include the Stephanie Mills record in this honorable mention, even though it didn't quite reach the top 10 on the R&B singles chart, believe it or not. The song peaked at number 12 on the R&B chart. Surprisingly, it peaked twice as high on the pop chart, reaching number 6 on that chart in November of 1980. So now let's talk about the number 1 hits. Here are the top crossover R&B and funk songs in 1980. The ranking is based on each song's peak performance on the Billboard Hot 100, commonly known as the pop charts. Number 14, Funkin' for Jamaica by the jazz funk trumpeter Tom Brown, Arista Records. The song spent 4 weeks at number 1 on the R&B singles chart in October of 1980. The song is the only record in this ranking that didn't chart on the Billboard Hot 100, which is basically why the record is at the bottom of the ranking. On a personal note, I thought that was Shaka Khan singing the vocals on this record when I was a kid. Shout out to Tony Smith, the actual female vocalist on the record. And one more thing, I thought the song was a tribute to Jamaica when I was a kid, the Caribbean island Jamaica. I learned later that the song was a tribute to Jamaica, Queens, New York, where Brown grew up. Number 13, Don't Say Goodnight, It's Time for Love by the Isley Brothers, T-Neck Records. This ballad spent 4 weeks at number 1 on the R&B chart in the spring of 1980. The song moved into the top 40 on the pop chart, peaking at number 39. Don't Say Goodnight is one of many great ballads by the legendary rock and roll funk band of Talented Brothers. Number 12, And the Beat Goes On by the Whispers, Solar Records. This groove spent 5 weeks at the very top of the R&B chart during the spring of 1980. The record peaked at number 37 on the pop chart. My wife will attest to how many times I have played this record over the years. Number 11, Let's Get Serious by JERMAINE Jackson, Motown Records. This nice little groove spent 6 weeks at number 1 on the R&B singles chart. The song was a top 10 record on the pop charts, peaking at number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100. One in a Million You by Larry Graham, Warner Records. One in a Million You spent 2 weeks at the top of the R&B chart in late August 1980. The love song moved into the top 10 of the pop chart, peaking at number 9 in September. One in a Million You is a certified gold seller. It's a nice vocal performance by the smooth balladeer. Number 9, The Second Time Around by Shalimar, Solar Records. The record spent 1 week on top of the R&B chart in February of 1980. The Second Time Around peaked at number 8 on the pop chart in March. The record is a certified gold seller. Solar Records is unsung in my opinion. From the Whispers to Shalimar, the Los Angeles-based label owned by Dick Griffey produced a nice roster of R&B acts. In fact, I did a video a while back on why 1980 was such a great year for Solar Records. I'll put the link to that video in the description. Number 8, Stomp by the Brothers Johnson, A&M Records. I love this party record. Cali Funk. It's one of the best dance records of the 80s in my opinion. Anyway, this funk jam spent 2 weeks at number 1 on the R&B singles chart in April of 1980. The song reached the top 10 on the Billboard Hot 100, peaking at number 7 in May. Number 7, Master Blaster, Jammin' by Stevie Wonder, Tamla Records. Stevie's jazzy reggae flavored record spent a strong 7 weeks at number 1 on the R&B singles chart in the latter part of 1980. The song reached number 5 on the pop chart in December of that year. Number 6, Special Lady by Ray, Goodman and Brown, Polydor Records. This smooth record was a number 1 hit on the R&B singles chart in February of 1980. The song moved into the top 5 on the Billboard Hot 100, peaking at number 5 on the pop chart. The record is a certified gold selling single. Number 5, Gimme the Night by George Benson, Warner Records. I love this song. Mr. Benson is one of the masters of that jazz soul fusion sound. Gimme the Night spent 3 weeks at number 1 on the R&B singles chart in the fall of 1980, and the song peaked at number 4 on the Billboard Hot 100. Number 4, Take Your Time, Do It Right by the SOS Band, Taboo Records. This is SOS Band's biggest record. My personal favorite record by the band is Tell Me If You Still Care, but Take Your Time is an outstanding dance song. The record spent 5 weeks at number 1 on the R&B singles chart during the summer of 1980. The band's record spent 2 weeks at number 3 on the pop chart in the latter part of the summer. Take Your Time to Do It Right is a platinum selling single. Number 3, Celebration by Kool and the Gang, D-Light Records. This all-time great party record spent 6 weeks at the top of the R&B singles chart in late 1980 into early 1981. The song went to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in February of 81, spending 2 weeks at the very top of the pop charts. Remember, it's included in this ranking because it became a number 1 R&B hit in 1980. Celebration is a platinum selling single. Number 2, Upside Down by Diana Ross, Motown Records. Miss Ross was truly a boss in the 1980s. Upside Down spent 4 weeks at number 1 on the R&B singles chart in the summer of 1980, and then spent another 4 weeks at number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 during the month of September. Upside Down is a certified gold selling single. And now, the biggest number 1 soul crossover hit in 1980, Rock With You by Jermaine Jackson's little brother, the one and only Michael Jackson, Epic Records. This legendary song spent 6 weeks on the R&B singles chart in early 1980. The record spent 4 weeks at number 1 on the pop chart during the same time period. Rock With You is a certified double platinum selling single. It's one of MJ's signature records and is definitely in my personal favorite list of top 5 Michael Jackson songs. So here's a few interesting things about the 80s year-by-year ranking. The first half of the 1980s make up 4 out of the top 5 spots for the decade: 1980, 84, 82, and 83. I was surprised at how low the average peak position on the pop charts was for top soul records that peaked in the years 1988 and 89. 1988's top soul records had an average peak of 33 on Billboard Hot 100. The average pop peak for 1989's top soul records was even lower, significantly lower, peaking at an average of 52 on the Billboard Hot 100. Now, there are several factors that led to the poor showing on the pop charts in these 2 years. I dive into the issues at the end of this entire series, but I will say this for now. One of the biggest factors is that several number 1 R&B hits in 88 and 89 did not chart on Billboard Hot 100 at all. In those cases, I assign each song a pop peak position of 101. When a year produced several non-Billboard Hot 100 charted R&B hits, which is what happened in 88 and 89, as well as other years in the decade, the average pop peak position dropped quite a bit. With that said, only the top 4 years of the decade had average peak positions that were in the top 25 on the pop charts: 1980, 84, 85, and 82. So most of the years in the 80s were penalized, if you will, by R&B hits that didn't chart on the Billboard Hot 100. Another factor that actually hurt R&B in terms of crossing over in the 80s is that the 80s produced too many number 1 soul hits that attracted largely soul music audiences, which isn't a bad thing, but I'll also dive more into that issue later in the series. The biggest years in the 80s, 1983 and 84 for the biggest superstars, Michael Jackson's singles from his Thriller album and Prince's singles from the Purple Rain album, are both in the top 5. 1983 is ranked number 5, while 1984 is ranked number 2. But you would think that 1983 or 84 would have taken the crown for top year in the 80s, right? Well, here's the thing. For a year to claim crossover crown for the decade, it had to be the tale of consistency by producing multiple crossover hits by a variety of soul artists. The crossover hits of 1, 2, or even 3 superstars in any given year, no matter how big those songs are, does not necessarily mean that was a big crossover year for soul music overall, especially if several other number 1 R&B hits charted rather low, if at all, on the Billboard Hot 100. With that said, the difference between the average peak position on the pop chart for soul records in 1980 versus soul records in 1984, Prince's big year, is just 2 spots. So let's move on to some interesting findings about the top 14 crossover soul hits of 1980. 11 of the 14 number 1 R&B hits reached the top 10 on the pop charts. Half 7 of the 14 of the number 1 R&B hits reached the top 5 on the pop charts. 3 of the 14 number 1 R&B hits also went to number 1 on the pop charts: Rock With You, Upside Down, and Celebration. 1980, the first year to jump off that great decade, was a strong crossover year for soul music. What's your favorite soul record in 1980? Is it one of the top 14, one of the honorable mentions, Or is it another song that was not highlighted in this episode? Thanks for joining me. Make sure you hit the like button if you enjoyed this video. Make sure you subscribe to this channel and hit the bell in order to be instantly notified when new videos are released. Your support is greatly appreciated. Next up in the crossover magic series, the cinematic and very funky Soulful 1970s. Here at Soulful Charts, we got the receipts. Thanks again for joining me. Peace.